Scott Smith, State Science Coordinator, State Department of Education. Give you a quick brief on the standards. As Scott Cook had mentioned, every 6 years, a set of standards will go through a review process leading up then to adoption process. And last year, I convened a committee of 15 folks from around the state, which were K-20 educators, stakeholders, patrons, business industry, higher ed, and so it was a good group of folks that came together with the passion of putting together a set of science standards, comparing to what we had prior to that, which have been on the books for 20 years. And so a lot has changed in 20 years. So we used some guiding documents, including the frameworks of science, to take a look at where we need to go with the 21st century. And that committee drafted in 4 days, which is a lot of work, a set of standards that we now call the Idaho Science Standards 2015 draft. They went before legislation this year, and they were not passed, they were not accepted, but we are going to then reconvene the committee and take edits from anybody that wants to then provide any comments. And there's a lot of comment time, and I've already got a whole list of comments, and we will reevaluate and go from there with the next legislative session. But again, we have a lot of checks and balances going on, including being passed by the State Board of Education. So after that, if you have further questions, let me know. And we have some questions, I believe, from folks in the audience.
Right. Ralph Peterson.
I'm Ralph Peterson, North Gym High School in Bancroft, one of the small schools. Nice to think about you guys talking about your schools. To be fair and open and honest, so you know, I was a member of that committee that wrote the standards. And so I just want to talk a bit about that process from teachers' perspective and how we worked. And I'll tell you, as we went through, we gathered the NGSS standards, the current state standards, the EOC content standards for both biology and chemistry. We sat down and we literally looked at every single word in all those standards and said, what is best for Idaho? We were not always in agreement at first, but I can tell you we were in total agreement by the time we were done. There was a discussion, sometimes was very, very rich. So that was the process. It was broken up into groups. There was an elementary group, a middle school group, and a high school group, and I was part of the high school group. And there were three teachers and a patron in that particular group going over these particular standards. So I just wanted to talk about the process. We're proud of the work we did, but we also know that we're not perfect. And so we're looking forward, and I'll personally, when I go back to Boise next month and sit down, I'm going to be happy to look at these things and seriously consider every single comment that comes through, because that's our job. And that's true. I mean, I've been looking at one from some comments from last night, and I think we can change some things. I really do, in a positive way. And so the public comment period, I think, is really good to help us see some things that maybe we didn't see. One thing I want to just kind of go through, mention like what Scott Cook mentioned a little bit earlier, that these are standards, but the school districts set the curriculum. In Idaho, we have a real diversity of how it looks in the middle school. And so one of the things we did is we actually have course progressions, and we set it up in the middle school in a conceptual progressions model where you teach physical science, life science, and earth science every year. Okay, and then what courses could you take for whatever course, 6th, 7th, and 8th. We also set up a way to do it if you have strict classes, physical science, life science, and earth science, and what standards you would use for those particular classes. So it was done that way because to give flexibility to school districts. I want to say one more thing about the Next Generation Science Standards. They were done a little bit differently than some other standards, the fact that they were made and given to the states and said, do with as you please. The very first discussion we had, our very first meeting, is what would the standards look like? And we decided to leave them in the form of the Next Generation Science Standards because that way, as teachers look, they can go online and get more resources. And again, it's about how do we help teachers. That's part of the standards. So these resources there, when you look at the standards, they're They're in the same order as they are for the next generation science standards, so teachers can say, what do I do with this? They can go online, Google that standard from NGSS, and get help. And that was the purpose why they look like NGSS. A few things have been taken out, a few things have been added, as we talked about it, but you have to look pretty hard to find a difference. You really would. But as I said, literally every word was looked at in this, and we talked about how do we make this look for Idaho. And so they are Idaho standards. So those are kind of my comments for today.
Thank you, Ralph. All right, next we have Rose Larson. He answered everything you wanted.
A lot of how the process and what you're looking at and why there's a difference looking at what we have and looking at some other things, and to be able to know that that's there because that helps provide resources for teachers, and teachers can go on and find more resources. That actually makes total sense. And so to help get that word out is really, thank you for sharing that information.
And Rose, you're correct. Here's an example of our draft standards. And I have to put myself back in when I started teaching in '89, not knowing where to begin. I would have loved a resource like this. I wasn't provided that. And so we take into account beginning teachers through, and again, a master teacher, such as Ralph, who can say, oh, how can I even supplement and go beyond? So that was part of our background.
Thank you.
Ralph, you had a further comment?
Just one more comment. When this committee was put together, it was put together with science teachers from around the state and other stakeholders, but around the state. So Aberdeen has one of the members of the committee, Malad, Bancroft, Idaho Falls. So Southeast Idaho is well represented, thinking about what our community's like as we put these together.
I guess one last comment on the standards. Well, I could probably add two, but I could go on and on. These are Idaho standards produced by Idaho educators for Idaho students. We're proud of what we have. We're doing a great job with the resources we have. And so they then are now owned by us.
All right. Do you have comments you'd like to?
I do.
Go ahead and state your name and...
Leanna Litzinger. I'm a science teacher at New Horizon High School in Pocatello. I've been working with a great group of people for several summers on curriculum development and in this case it was biology. There were other groups that worked on the physical sciences. And we knew and looked forward to our science standards being updated. Even for long-term teachers, the current science standards are not good. And I cannot, for a new teacher, they're so broad that what do you even do with them? So we were including basically NGSS because we weren't sure about, the new science standards in with our curriculum development so that we had a head start and didn't have to go back and grab those. So it's disappointing that they were not adopted this year. I'm concerned that we're going to be stuck with those old standards for another couple of years. And I guess the comment that I want to make is that whatever comments are made, we need to take science into consideration. Somebody's, whether it's they don't believe in the Big Bang or they don't believe in the age of the Earth, those are individual issues, and it's not that they're not important, but, we as schools should be held to a higher standard, and that's following the science. So that's what I have to say.
Thank you.
Can I answer
Ralph?
just a little bit?
Yes.
Thank you for going ahead and setting those standards, because if you have those standards, you can completely embody the old state standards plus.
Yes.
And so doing what you did is not an unfortunate thing, it's a very good thing for science education.
And I think so too. We, the clarification that we saw with NGSS is just so refreshing because, now we know exactly what that broad statement in the old standards
And we have
meant.
kept that.
Yes. Thank you.
Great comment. Higher ed is using NGSS. Certain districts around the state, as you mentioned, are proactive, and they have followed then NGSS. And so we've done the best we can to take NGSS and then even add supplements to the NGSS. So, yes, thank you.
Are there any other comments? Yes.
Kent Hobbs from Pocatello. By whom were the standards not accepted or adopted? The state board or legislature?
It was unanimously approved by state board, and then when it went to legislation in new session in 2016, it was, I guess, just not moved forward.
And may I make a comment from when I was doing just a little bit of background checking, what I read, and of course, according to the resources that I read from, was that the individuals who sort of, tried to move people not to accept them didn't say that they disagreed with any of the standards. They said, we haven't given the public enough input. We need to give the public input.
Thank you for the clarification.
Which brings us here tonight.
And happy Earth Day. Today is Earth Day. The population is soon to be 7.6 billion.
Looks pretty
And
hot
so
up there.
The point, yes, a little bit of warmth on our global, I guess, environment. And their goal is to plant 7.6 billion trees today. Best of luck.
Are there any other comments on the science standards? Suggestions?